No, no. We can take questions.
Great.
A few questions.
So questions. Just raise your hand and I'll pick you out. I'll try and start.
Names and...
Names and numbers. Start at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Ruth Bungay and I really enjoyed your talk. I'm very fascinated to know that how you think we can mobilise our power.
So we'll take three, then is that fine? Three?
Yeah.
Yeah, three.
On the
Name?
Cassia,
Cassia.
and the Robin Hood tax, a sort of 0.1% tax on financial transactions.
Yep.
What kind of impact do you think that could have
Yep.
on the financial system?
Absolutely.
Right, the third one was somewhat right back.
It's Nathan. To what extent is this a national...
What's your name?
Nathan.
Nathan, sorry.
So what extent is this a national versus an international issue? One of the easiest passovers that you see from politicians is that it's of an international scale.
Yeah, good questions.
Okay. Do you want to take this one?
Right, so how to mobilise the power. You know, I've come here to say, look, this is how to understand the system. The question now is, I want you to go away and think about how to mobilise the power. Now, I need to tell you this. I forgot to tell you the really lovely story about Jubilee 2000. Because the thing is that when we were cutting the diamond and trying to understand how to explain the sovereign debt of the poorest countries to the rest of the world, and we had to analyse it properly, because most people say, oh, you know, those countries, those black people, they're incompetent, corrupt, etc., etc. So we came, I mean, I often think Jubilee 2000 was really an anti-racist campaign, because we spent so much time dealing with those arguments. But the thing was that we briefed people on the way the system worked and what happened. And it was quite extraordinary how just the knowledge mobilised people. So let me tell you the story. Civil servants complained, and Gordon Brown had to hire additional civil servants to deal with all the correspondence that came. And one day, civil servant said to me, I don't know what's going on here, he said. I had a letter the other day from a lady on pink paper with a bunch of roses in the corner. And it said, why had we agreed on Uganda's debt-to-export ratio at such an arbitrary level? And secondly, what had led us to set a cut-off date for the assessment of Uganda's debt as 1982, which should have taken into account the period of Idi Amin? He said, how does she know about Uganda's cut-off date? And how did she learn about Uganda's debt-to-export ratio? I said, we just told her. You see, it's not rocket science. But can you imagine this woman sitting at her kitchen table with her pink paper with roses in the corner, and she's empowered because suddenly she understands something about the financial system and she can have a go. And the civil servant has to write back to her, and Gordon Brown has to sign the letter. You know? So, and then the next thing we said, right, we've got to come to a big demonstration in Birmingham of the G8, and you've got to come and explain it to them. And when we got to Birmingham, we had a terrible time at the Foreign Office. We don't like having all those lefties come there, you know. And the Germans were very uptight because we were going around saying, look, Germany got massive debt relief after the war. She gave her children a future, or we gave her children a future. Couldn't we give African children a future? So Helmut Kohl spoke to Blair and said, look, we're not coming because your people are being very rude about us. So it's tough. So the police arranged that there should be no demonstrations. So we organised a human train. And then the more we organised it, the more they pushed us away from the centre of Birmingham. So we were 9 miles away from the centre. We had 9 miles of chain and way away from... And then, on the Tuesday before the big demonstration, Blair arranged to fly the leaders out of Birmingham to a castle somewhere so they wouldn't be embarrassed by all these people. Well, what happened? They emptied Birmingham. But in the meantime, there were 3,000 journalists there. And they all turned up on my doorstep and said, what's all this about? So, well, Dad, what are you talking about? No, there's nothing happening in the hall. So we said, blah, blah, blah. The next thing, Alistair Campbell phoned up and said, oh, can we come back to Birmingham, please? And we bring the Prime Minister, and can we please, sorry, we're very embarrassed about all this. You know, that was done by people. It was done just by people. And those people, they got there, not because we mobilised them, because we didn't have any money to do that much mobilisation. But because they didn't know little letters on paper and understood. And once they understood, they felt empowered. So that's My short answer to your question, the Robin Hood tax, I'm absolutely in love with the Robin Hood tax. So I believe my favourite policy proposal is that we should manage flows of capital across borders. And everybody will tell you that's terribly difficult to do. Nobody's ever going to do it, right? And the Robin Hood tax is one way of managing flows across borders. And what it is sand in the wheels of these flows. So you're not blocking, you're not controlling these flows. You're simply saying, Amazon, if you want to come to our country and take loads of money out of our country, we're going to tax you for moving that out of our country. And of course, Amazon is but a small beer compared to some of the flows that come in and out of our country. And so the Robin Hood tax is just one. So capital controls are taxes on flows. They're not like exchange controls, which are limitations of the amount of exchange you can take out of the country. They're taxes on flows across borders. So I think Cassio asked that question, didn't you? Sorry, I'm looking to the wrong person. So thank you very much, and I think we should support it, but we should ask for more of those taxes, not just one. Nathan, national versus international. That is the big question, and we're told, sorry, we can't do anything about this, Governor, because it's global. Right, well, tell that to China. China has capital controls. China manages her currency. China cannot afford to have a financial crisis and to have social unrest. Right, so she has to manage her financial system, and she does. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, and I'm not an expert on how it's done, but I do know that were there political will, and we wanted, and I can assure you this, and this is what's terrifying, is that if we don't manage the system, we're going to get a kind of protectionism which is going to be ugly, irrational, and, ad hoc. Right? It's going to happen. Countries are going to put up, they're going to build a wall. So when Donald Trump said he was going to build a wall, he said he was going to make the Mexicans pay for it. And it was going to cost $16 billion. And how were they going to pay for it? He was going to control the flow of money across Mexican borders. I've got his quotation on that, right? Now, the problem with when you get a reactionary response to this globalization of finance is you get it in this very irrational, ugly way. Much better for that to be managed in a coordinated way through international fora. Now, that's unlikely to happen, but what we're getting is the worst of it, really. We're getting the kind of protectionism, both in trade, but pretty soon in financial services, that are going to be very damaging to the economy as a whole. But that's because our leaders won't sit down and manage the thing at an international level. We've got to put pressure on them to do that.
Yes. It's coming. It's coming.
Sorry.
When you were describing Sandra Crawford.
Sandra, where are you? I can't see you. Okay. Yeah.
When you were describing Malawi, I thought in one aspect that reminded me of the Eurozone. Could you describe how the lack of central banks in each country caused problems with sovereign currency and Keynesian stimulus?
Yeah.
Straight behind you.
My name is Anne.
Hello, Anne.
Hi. I just wondered why, in your opinion, when we bailed out the banks, we didn't at that time impose those terms and conditions that you speak of.
You've got the answer in your question. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then someone's already got a microphone.
Thank you. My name's Tim. I study with the Institute of Sustainability here at Cambridge. I'm curious, you talked about 1950 to 1970 being a time in our history where we made a lot of progress. What aspect of that time do you think was most beneficial for our societies? Was it the tax on a higher tax bracket, access to education, access to health care?
Okay. Right. Big questions. Sandra, Eurozone. Yeah. I mean, the euro was designed by the finance sector. Right? So what the Eurozone hates more than anything is the idea that people like you and me, taxpayers, are going to get our hands on this stuff and manage it somehow. We want, we want to stabilise the exchange rate, or we may want to lower interest rates because our local economy can't stand very high rates of interest, and very few economies can. And the finance system, they want to be able to decide on the value of the exchange rate and on the value of interest, and on the rate of interest. And they want to decide whether or not they flood into an economy or out of it. And they want to decide who they lend to, so they lend crazy money to Greece, and then they want to be bailed out by German taxpayers, which they won't. Okay. So this is kind of huge injustice on a very grand scale. And I'm very critical of the way the euro is being structured. And I think the structure of the euro is what gives us Catalonia, it's what gives us the AFD, if I may say so, in Germany. It's what it's giving us Mr. Le Pen in France. It's giving us precisely all those reactions that I've said are irrational and ugly, and potentially ugly and dangerous. And it's so similar to Europe in the 1920s and 30s. Then we had the gold standard. And the gold standard was supposed to do what the euro did, which is automatically adjust without any interference from public authority, which it did until it broke, right? And collapsed. And I think the euro is not a sustainable currency, because you can't allow whole countries not to be able to somehow manage their economies, basically. And when people look at politicians, and this is why, for me, this explains the collapse of social democracy across Europe. Because the politicians said, nothing to do with me, God. It's the market. It's the international market, and I can't do anything about it. Well, if you can't get out of the way, then we'll find a strong man who will protect us from these forces. So, I have a very grave... Having said that, I'm a Remainer and deeply critical of the Brexiteers, because I believe they are going to make things worse. Because whatever happens, we've got a fixed Europe, and we're better doing it together than we would be doing it as a little island out, in the middle of the sea. And secondly, because the United States, the model of the United States economy is not our model. We have social welfare as part of our history, and it's deeply embedded. And nor is China part of our model, right? But those are the two big forces in the world today. Little Britain, an island in the middle of all this lot, is going to get clobbered. In fact, I am quite convinced the Brexiteers, the crazy ones,
Quite a few.
Sorry?
Quite a few.
Quite a few would love for us to be managed by American capital, would love to hand over the National Health Service to the American pharmaceutical company. They believe that would make our health service more efficient and blah, blah, right? So we are governed by people with those kinds of crazy ideas. And so I'm anti-Brexit, passionately anti-Brexit. But it's really difficult because I know there are many on the left, and I'm critical of them as well, who think that Europe, is like the euro. It's based on the euro. And for example, that it would be very hard to nationalise the railways. The public now, what's so fascinating about the legatum data that came out the other day, 70% of the public want to nationalise the railways. And as someone who stood on the train all the way from London tonight, I understand that feeling. And then there's 50% of the population want to nationalise the banks. Right? That's extraordinary. Right? So, we know there's progressive forces there, but what many on the left argue is that if we stayed in the euro, we wouldn't be able to nationalise the railways. And it's true. And the very ironic thing is this, that much of Eurozone economic policy is dictated by the Brits, by the Anglo-Americans. The Germans, for example, are very uptight about giving away their municipal assets to some private sector guy to drain of rent and so on. And they've resisted. So much of the policy, that sort of liberal finance of Europe, is actually British. It's Anglo-American policy. So I could go on about the Eurozone for and honestly, that's my point. Now, there were some terms and conditions for the bailouts of RBS, but they were feeble. Essentially, Alistair Darling and others said, we want you to carry on running. We don't want you to be nationalised. We don't want to give the impression that you're nationalised. And so the RBS has enjoyed the biggest bailout in history and is still run and still pays dividends to private shareholders, right? So, and has had enormous difficulty cleaning up its act and its balance sheet. So, and you know, we've got this bank, we nationalised it, the taxpayers bailed it out, and yet we haven't said to it, look, you can have the bailout, but why don't you please invest in some, you know, wind farms, or we'd like you to see you do this, or, you know, we need housing. There are lots of things, or municipal housing, there are lots of things that the bank could invest in, and it won't do that, of course.
Which was what was done between 1930 and 1971.
Absolutely, yeah. And during the war, Keynes said to the banks, thou shalt lend to the government at 1%, or else we'll remove your license. You know, it's not rocket science. So we didn't do that. 1950 to 70, don't stop me on that. Because for me that is, and it's not just for me, all economists talk about that period as the golden age of economics. Who asked me that question? It was Tim. Where's Tim? Oh, there you are, Tim. Sorry. So, you know, all economists talk about the period as the golden age of economics. We had high levels of employment, not just here, but in Africa, for example. We had stability, you know. Clearly, it wasn't sexy enough for some people, you know. Some days were very boring, and people complained about that. And you couldn't do what young people do, is just travel around the world without any effort whatsoever. You couldn't buy iPhones very easily, because, you know, they would have been difficult to do that. So, you know, there are things happening now which didn't happen then. So I'm not trying to say that it was a glorious period. It was a period of absolute stability and of full employment and of subordination of the finance sector to the interests of the democracy. And they hated that. They hated it. They hated it. There's a lovely history which the economics editor of Sky has just written about the Bretton Woods Conference, and Roosevelt and Keynes, between them, colluded, and they made sure that not a single banker turned up at Bretton Woods. They weren't allowed to come. So it was only economists, and interestingly, it was economists from the South as well as the North. Ed Conway, that's his book, it's a really great read. The minute they left Bretton Woods and went to Washington, the bankers started lobbying. But they couldn't really, and Keynes didn't get his way at Bretton Woods, of course, because the Americans wanted to take over our trade markets and so on. But nevertheless, something of what Keynes had hoped for, and that's why it's wonderful to be speaking here to his hometown where nobody teaches his theory. The way he managed, he insisted the international system should be managed under the Bretton Woods framework, ensured, you know, full employment stability. You know, it was the best of times. You know, we all grew up in these stable, sunny times, really, for us. Admittedly, there was a Cold War, and that helped to kind of keep things under control. But we all know, that's why I'm so inspired by the period, because we all know, because he also had to do it after a major financial crisis in 29. So in 29, he was writing about that barbaric relic, the gold standard. And by 1933, it had collapsed. And when it collapsed, everybody said, we didn't know that could happen. We didn't know you could do that. You know? And then, of course, we started to get, employment started, everything got better, especially in the United States, where Roosevelt effectively applied the policies, until in 37, Roosevelt lost his nerve and began to cut back, and then the evidence of that quickly became clear, and then he started to invest again. And then, of course, the war came. But 45 to 71 is the golden age of economics. And, you know, it's not as if it's rocket science, as if we can't learn from that experience. We sure can. And we can, in my view, recreate it in some form. It won't be the same, but the principles, the economic principles behind it ought to be the same. And the most important principle is that finance should be servant to the real economy, not master of the real economy.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the role of cryptocurrencies in the future economy.
Aha!
That was the question I was going to ask you.
Okay.
Right back to Belinda. Yeah.
Belinda Brooks Gordon, so it's a bit of a parochial question.
Yeah.
The Financial Times this morning and previous weekend Financial Times have gone on a lot about the university pension scheme.
Yeah.
How can the state audit our teaching, audit our research, tell us which fees to charge, but then not back pensions?
Especially our pensions. Well, Willie's been shouting at us, so I'm going to speak.
Yeah.
spoke in favour of will-making. For my sins, I specialise in Argentine politics and economics and relations with Britain. So, I followed your writing on this. You speak in favour of sovereign debt. My country is always borrowing, rarely investing, pumping money abroad. There's more than one GDP held by Argentine portfolio abroad. So that can't be good, except for the bankers.
Yeah. Okay. I told you I'd be intimidated by this audience. Right, Yushin, cryptocurrency, and I think they're a Ponzi scheme. They're all Ponzi schemes. It's awful. And it's going to be really awful when they collapse, right? But the reason I'm most against them is that they're based on this antiquated monetarist theory that money is like a commodity. So the man that invented it, what was his name?
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yeah, he said there can only be 71 million bitcoins ever. And he did it on the principle that he was going to turn Bitcoin into gold, right? It's going to be scarce and it's going to be valuable. And sure enough, when he started, the price was this, and it's just gone like that, all the way through the roof. So if you bought at this point, you are mega bucks rich, right? If you're buying up there, God help you, because it's about to crash, really. So I think it's a con, but there's not really, I've just tweeted, by the way, a really interesting article by a woman called Elizabeth Walsh, who says that it's infiltrating the traditional monetary system, the wider monetary system. Hedge funds are setting up cryptocurrency funds and attracting large sums of money into it. And so therefore she says there's a big potential of cryptocurrency also kind of triggering another crisis, another systemic crisis because of the role. But I'm not sure that's true. Hedge funds, are a small beer these days in the global system. But who knows, But for me, the biggest flaw in it is that it's based on monetary theory, really. And money, the great thing about money is that it's never scarce, right? It's never scarce, and that's something I want you to understand. Belinda, the universal pension scheme, I'm really hopeless on pensions. I don't know really much about them, but what I do know is that we privatise them. And so we rely on BlackRock to tell us whether or not there are any valuable returns on our pensions. And BlackRock, manages something like $6 trillion, David, is it? Of our money, $15 billion a month is pouring into BlackRock's and other asset management funds' coffers, and we are handing it over. And God knows what they're doing with it. They're out there in the shadow. David will tell you they're out there in the shadow banking sector, fooling around with synthetic collateral, right? And that's our futures, really. So for me, we've got to bring them back on shore, those pensions, back in-house, and we've got to manage them ourselves. But honestly, I better not go too deep into that. That's not me. William, I was in Argentina in 2001. I know a fair amount about Argentina. The biggest thing that I think we need to understand about Argentina was that for 50 years, she was the IMF's favourite client. So we have 50 years of monetarist, neoclassical monetary theory and policy applied to Argentina, and we've had 50 years of recurrent crises. That's all I say.
And consistent impoverishment of the...
And consistent, no, it's evil. I was there as Lloyds Bank was shunting its money out of the country.
HSBC.
And HSBC and poor people, because they were using the old, they were dollarizing their assets and getting them out as quickly as possible, and poor people were sitting on, chairs outside the bank waiting
But now
to
the
get
money is, the debt has been paid, we grew for many years at 8% of GDP, and the nincompoops of the voters went and voted in right-wingers that are doing exactly the same.
I agree, and I agree that his predecessor messed up, and I agree that often the left, because the left doesn't understand money, messes up majorly, wants to keep the liberalised financial system with money flowing in and out because they may benefit from that. but doesn't do the stuff they should do to manage the economy. But that's down to a great deal of ignorance there is, you know, and a powerful lobby as well, of course. So yes, no, and the public don't know what to do. I mean, they could see her messing up, so they wanted somebody else that they thought might know how to manage the system, and now we get... So that's what I think about. I mean, I blame the IMF, you know, almost entirely for the policies that have so hurt Argentina, and it's about time the IMF...
We left it, and now listen to this president who holds billions abroad.
And what about the vulture funds that demanded repayment? Dear old Elliot Partners, talk about evil.
And we rejoined the IMF.
But Argentina never defaulted on her IMF debt. That was the sad part, in my view. She defaulted on the debt owed by poor old pensions in Italy, but not on IMF debt. But anyway, the point is that it's a bad old world out there, and we've got to change it, guys. We've got to change it.
Yeah. Great. Okay. I think this will be the last round. So put your hand up and ask a question, and I'll get to everybody. Starting here. Right? Trying to do my John Berkeley.
And several times you said they.
Sorry, what's your name?
Helen.
Helen.
Several times you said they didn't like it, they stopped it, they don't want us to do it. Can you be specific about who the they are?
You mean?
Well, you said for example about up until 1971 was the golden age, but they didn't like it.
Oh right, okay.
And you've used that term several times. So
I've got it. Okay.
So they're next. We're going to do all these ones.
Benjamin Rizzo, hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering, you were saying about you didn't like the bailout of the banks per se. I was wondering whether you would recommend, for example, at that time, bringing the accounts that existed onto the Bank of England's bank account as people having direct bank accounts. Because you were saying about how it wasn't possible to create money without borrowers, but it would be much easier to do that via, for example, helicopter money if people had bank accounts at the Bank of England.
Okay.
Would you support that policy?
Okay.
As John Berkeley says, very brief questions at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, just trying to think.
Edward Lee, you talked about money creation, that all debt has to either be repaid or cancelled.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit about the destruction of money and the role of inflation in that?
Okay.
There's two at the front, the second row. There we go.
My name's Harry.
Yeah.
I spent my whole life doing research in scientific and engineering problems. When I retired, I thought I'd ask this silly question: what is money? Where does it come from? And what is this economic system I keep reading now? So 70 years later, I'm still looking at the diamond, the facets, and then more and more as I go along. By the way, your book's been a great help. But the question that bothers me as much as most is, why is the academic system, fraternity, so determined not to teach what is becoming transparent and what was known before? Why is it that, you know, if it's as bad as you say, as I read, they should all be booted out and we should start again?
Yeah.
For those who didn't hear that question, it was what's wrong with academic economics? We could be here all night.
Hi, my name's Kenny.
Yeah.
As you said, it's up to us to work out ways, you know, of combining so that we can make these changes. But I think, you know, the poor and the little people have to have a stake in these changes beyond just creating a more stable world.
Yeah.
And is the guaranteed basic income a tool for enfranchising poor people at a stroke?
Right.
Good, there you go.
So, you know, the other night I was doing something and someone tweeted about my opinionated views on things, and I am highly opinionated, and, you know, take them or leave them, really. But who are they? Helen? They are the financial sector lobbyists, basically, and who they are, I mean, the people working in the finance sector, the numbers are small, and they're not all bad guys, there's a lot of good guys there too, you know, but it's small and they're powerful. They have a lot of leverage because they have a lot of money. And they've basically bought up all our politicians, you know. I think the reason Jeremy Corbyn is so popular is because he doesn't have a contract with BlackRock. Or, George Osborne has. George Osborne's paid £600,000 a year by BlackRock, okay? And Tony Blair's paid, I think, £2 million a year by JP Morgan. The people aren't stupid, they see this, right? But that's what you have to do if you want to control the system. You buy up the politicians, and our politicians being bought. So they are the people that do that. And how it's done is, of course, is always very gentlemanly, I'm sure, and so on. And people are very proper and people offer decent research and so on. But effectively, it's lobbyist. Bailout of the banks, should we have a council at the central bank? That was Benjamin. Yeah, Benjamin, I know that's what people have talked about in people's QE and all that, but, you know, you know, what these questions are showing up is how inadequate my talk was. I didn't cover enough territory. So the thing is that, you know, the whole point about having the central bank and the banks having accounts with this is to manage the banking system. And then we have something that's much more grassrootsy, which is a bank in our town to which we can just walk into and apply for a loan. Now, the fact that that system's not working at the moment to provide us with the finance that we need for economic activity doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't go to the central bank. We need to keep a distance between these institutions because that's part of how, you know, to manage the system. So I think that's a silly idea. I don't agree with it, and I don't agree. You know, it's based on the notion that the central bank prints money, so that if we go to the central bank, they'll give us a. But your commercial bank prints money. Yeah, NatWest, HSBC, they print money every day. And this thing about, you know, monetarists go on about how the central banks print money. It was so funny that 32 of them wrote to the Federal Reserve to say, if you engage in QE, which isn't printing money at all, you're going to have massive inflation, and there's been no inflation. And these guys are not so embarrassed that they resigned. They're still in their position. They're still very powerful. So the point is that it's a bottom-up process, and I want to see it stay like that because that's more democratic and accountable and can be more transparent. But it means something about the local banks who aren't necessarily lending properly. Edward, I haven't written down your question.
Well, that's destruction of money.
Yeah, now that, I think, because you know, you're absolutely right. So the way a financial system should work is that the banks create credit on application for loans. That credit is then invested in whatever, and the best thing for it to happen is for it to be invested in employment, right? If you put the money into a pre-existing asset, like property, then all you will do is elevate the price of that asset, inflate it. But nothing new is going to happen. You know, they're not going to put a new bathroom on the top of the house or stuff. But if you employ somebody with that money, that generates income. And guess what? The income pays for itself. If the government invests, say, in a nurse looking after people with Alzheimer's, that nurse pays tax, PAYE, especially if she's on the public payroll. Then she goes shopping, and there's taxes associated with the shopping, VAT or whatever. The shopkeeper makes a profit, and then capital gains tax applies, right? And each time that money goes back to the government, and that's the way to keep the system stable, and that's what they did between 45 and 75. But if you allow money to be used for speculation on property, where you're not going to generate income necessarily, then you're not going to be able to find the money to pay back. So you're right, there has to be a system, it's a circular, and it has to be in equilibrium, right? That's why it has to be managed. But what has to be managed more than anything else is that the money should be invested for employment generation. If you think about it, Keynes' great work is called The General Theory of Employment Interest. He thought interest was incredibly important, and money, right? He wanted to see employment, because employment generates income, as we all know. When we get a job, we get income. But not just for us, but for others, you know. So if you employ the nurse, you help the private sector, where she goes for a coffee or to buy a washing machine or whatever. So that's the way to do it. But what we've allowed to happen is for the money to be spewed out by the banks. So in 1971 we altered the rules and we introduced something called competition and credit control, all competition, no control. And after that the banks were allowed to lend money for anything. Before that there were qualitative criteria for lending. After that, the only thing that determined whether or not you should lend was the price. And I don't know if you all watched The Big Short, which is a fabulous movie. Do you know the scene where they go into the nightclub and they ask the pole dancer, the Wall Street guys, they ask the pole dancer, have you got a mortgage? She says, oh, I've got a mortgage. I've got a mortgage. Why? Because Goldman Sachs could charge her 15% because she was risky, right? So a load of money goes into risky activity, mainly speculative. Oh, the price of her flats, the 5 flats, she's got to give them right forever, you know, they're never going to fall. The wonderful thing about it is that woman and the other poor people who took out subprime mortgages brought down the whole financial system. So that's the only virtuous thing about it. But that is a consequence of allowing the banks to have only one criteria by which to decide whether to lend. And of course, when you lend for risky speculative activity, you can charge much higher rates of interest. So they would rather do that. And then you end up, you know, not generating the income to repay. Then you get this whole massive imbalance in the debt story. Why is the something academic fraternity still in its, why are they still in their jobs? That's a very good question, Harry. But you shouldn't ask me, you should ask the economics department at Cambridge University that question. I've been on a panel at King's College with the head of economics there, and he was terribly rude. He thinks Keynes is like literature, really, more than economics. So we all have been batting away and attacking the academics, but that hasn't altered their power. They're where they are. You know, they have, many of them have got what is called tenure. And they control the publications and so on. But you know, the old internet is doing its bit in undermining some of the credibility of those guys. So the poor have to have a stake. Where is Kenny? UBI. I'm against UBI. You could I'm opinionated, right? I'm against UBI. The principle behind UBI is that we're not going to have any jobs for people, that automation is going to take over, that there's an endless supply of what are known as rare earths, and the clue is in the name, all obtained from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to fuel our iPhones and robots and all that fancy stuff, and we're going to be able to go on doing this forever, and robots are going to take over the world, and therefore there's never going to be any work. Well, I think that's utopian. I think it's a kind word for it. But above all, I believe employment is absolutely fundamental to human, social and psychological health. If you've ever been to a country where there are high levels of unemployment, you will see how the ecosystem is degraded by that, how the social and political system is degraded by that. So I think there's something defeatist about UBI, which is that, you know, we can't hope to have jobs. There is so much work to be done out there, and the idea that we don't have enough jobs to employ people is I think, very defeatist. I'm against it, strongly. Right,